advise, you might have seen the notice come up that this session will be recorded. So, you have that information when you choose whether to have your video on or not. And all the recordings will be available later, probably up on the website as of next week. So we'll kick things off. Thank you all for joining. Welcome. Innovative Building Solutions, Session 7 of NENA and Co-Housing Australia's annual, currently and hopefully into the future, Housing Week. My name is Matt Daly. I'm a member of the Co-Housing Australia Board and a research fellow at the University of Wollongong's Sustainable Building Research Centre. And also relevant for today's talks, a Muddy, the child of mud brick house builders. So before I introduce our presenters, I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all situated. I'm in Yuin country on the south coast of New South Wales. I pay my respects to the elders past and present and extend that gift to future generations and anyone here today or listening into the future. I want to acknowledge that we can't really talk about housing, land ownership and stewardship without acknowledging that we're on unceded land and recognising that there's this ongoing connection between kin, culture and community and country on the land that we're all situated on. Feel free to drop your name and country you're on into the chat as we go through. I also want to acknowledge that we're meeting in the context of a climate and biodiversity emergency, and that our housing and the externalities of our housing choices have real implications for our planetary footprint and our capacity individually and collectively to mitigate the ongoing emergency and potential catastrophe. So thank you all for joining us. A couple of quick housekeeping matters. Session is being recorded and will be available. Michelle's put into the chat that hopefully available as of next week on the NENA website. We're going to have 3 speakers today. If you have questions at any time, please feel free to pop them in the chat, and there'll be a bit of time after each speaker for some questions, and then we'll have plenty of time at the end for some more interactive Q&A. And when you do ask a question, feel free to introduce yourself. So today, it's a bit of a case of what's old is new again. We're going to be hearing from 3 speakers with a real wealth of experience with innovative natural building techniques, materials, processes, with a real focus on kind of use of earth in buildings. So we've got Peter Hickson, a master builder and president of Earth Building Association of Australia, who's going to kick things off with a broad introduction to earth building. Martin Freeney, who runs Earthship Eco Homes Consultancy, will be talking about earthship building practices and some of his current projects. And Ray Trappell, an architect with over 45 years experience with earth building, will probably focus more on rammed earth building techniques. So I'm looking forward to hearing from all 3 of these guys, and we'll kick things off with Pete. So if you'd like to share your screen, Pete, I'll just give you a little bit more of a background that Pete's been working with earth building for over 40 years, specialising in design and construction of buildings with raw, unfired earth, and as well working in the promotion of earth building. As I said, he's the president of the Earth Building Association of Australia and very active, speaking to government and people within the industry. And he also runs his own business, Earth Building Solutions, offering building, training and consultancy. So how are you going there?
I've pressed that share screen. It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay. Try it now. And hopefully that should work.
Is that working?
Not yet.
Sorry?
Not working yet.
Okay, well, I had the, crikey. Okay, I'll try that.
There we go.
Okay, good. Okay, is that one?
Yep, we've got that. Take it away.
Excellent. Right. So Matt's asked me to talk about earth building innovation and about some of the recent projects. I'm unaware who the audience is, so I'm assuming that most people know very little about earth building or what it is. I was already a carpenter when I joined, when I became involved in earth building in '82, and I knew absolutely nothing about it. So I'll share a bit of my journey into sustainable building, and where I arrive at the conclusion that earth building is the ultimate green building material, and one that we all need to know about. In 2012, the Smithsonian Institute made 40 predictions for the next 40 years. The very first prediction was that in 40 years' time, we'll be living in sophisticated buildings made of earth. Okay, so I'll explain what earth is. So basically, that's about as simple as it gets. Subsoil plus water equals mud, plus sun equals unfired earth building. And everything I show you today will be basically put together with that. It's a little bit more complicated than that, though. So earth building is building with unfired earth. It's just, in its simplest form, it's basically building with subsoil, clay as a binder, and silt, sand, and sometimes gravel inert fillers, though sometimes natural fibres or natural lightweight aggregates can be used to improve performance. So traditionally, it was the material was taken from the foot of the building, and then it was prepared with water to make it ready for moulding, stomping, tamping, and it dates back 11,000 years. It's found on every continent except Antarctica, to my knowledge. So that's the secret formula there. And archaeologists dated back to Jericho some 11,000 years ago. It's much older than that, I think. And I think the first Australians definitely used it. How long ago they used it for, I don't know. I'll remove the secret formula before you all know everything about earth building. So in Australia, there was wattle and daub. That was what the first Australians did mainly. And within weeks, within months of the colonists arriving, they started to build wattle and daub and cob buildings, which were the sort of things that they were used to in England and Ireland where they came from. And they had very little resources. So that's what they started to use. Mud brick was used in the colonies of Victoria, South Australia, West Australia. Pise came in the 1800s. It was again used post-war, and then stabilised rammed earth, started in the 70s to now. Poured earth is fairly recent, formed cob is very recent. Light earth method is a thing that's come in recently also from Germany, and it's to do with meeting energy requirements in colder climates. And then earth renders came about to use on straw bale and to use on light earth method. And then Ray's having a go at rammed earth, traditional rammed earth, again unstabilised. So this is an old building that dates back to the 1800s that I had the privilege of working on a couple of years ago. It's wattle and daub. It's probably as basic as you can get a building to be. And we were doing some work on it. It hasn't been lived in for probably 20 years or something rather. There were uni students in it there for a while back then. And it's not listed as historic, but it's definitely a worthwhile building to save. So that's what it looked like after we did a little bit of work on it. Put a little veranda on it, capped off the chimney, and whitewashed it, earth render over the wattle and daub that was exposed before. And this is a cob building that's in Connell, New South Wales as well. And it had cement render on it. It's not the best thing to put over earth. And it had problems with drainage around it and problems with roof drainage. We fixed all that up and gave it a bit of a lease of life. Again, it's got lime render all around it now, which is a much better way to go. That's what it was like before. That's what it was like when we finished. So some of my innovations and work has been involved with modern acceptance and practical considerations of using earth building today, local brick production, mud brick production, moving to load-bearing construction rather than post and beam, earthquake and hazard safe buildings for low-cost solutions in Asia, pushing sustainability, lowest possible earth embodied energy, incorporating renewables for zero carbon full life cycle performance, optimizing earth thermal characteristics, lobbying for assessment pathway for low energy passive buildings, and climate resilience modelling, and then monitoring, assessing and auditing an earth building to see how it goes. So I'm going to share a few of my earlier projects. This one here is a Catholic church in NENA, which was with post and beam construction. It's done that way because the outer ring takes the big free spanning roof, 11 metres by 11 metres, and there's a tension ring and a compression ring doing that. And the bricks were infilled, made by the students and laid by the students. And we re-rendered and painted that recently. This is one of my favourite buildings here. It's a mud brick building with a lot of sustainable features in it, and it's been recently assessed in E2 Global and was 108% full life cycle design carbon zero. But it uses a lot of recycled windows and doors and round poles for the posts and rafters and floor joists and everything, local ones, and yeah, lots of sustainable features in that. Now, this is a low-cost building, bamboo reinforced cob building that I built in the Philippines for low-cost housing, and it was tested at UTS University and achieved multiple shakes at 8.5 Richter and wasn't destroyed. So the innovation there is the fact that it's not really the material earth that's a problem, it's more how you use the material. This is a green skills training centre I built in 2010, and it's designed, constructed that. It was had a very sustainable feature in a building that I could do at the time, and I think it won some awards. But you know, integrated permaculture gardens into it. This is a more recent mud brick home. You know, it's pretty acceptable sort of house in the countryside. It was able to get 5.4 stars in NATERS, which is all you need in New South Wales because of basics. However, you know, we've got some problems with NATERS into the future. I'll discuss later. And this is a owner-built sort of place, built in the 80s up near Kangaroo Valley that we did some work on. And the innovation there was in the renders and daubing method we used to repair that building. This is a carport and mud brick workshop that was lost in the Black Summer bushfires. And you can see that the carport, all the iron and the timber from the carport, which was open, which took out the building, destroyed everything except for the mud brick wall, which was still standing. You can see in the middle of the photo there that the lintel and the doorway was burnt out. So some of that had to be deconstructed and reconstructed, but the mud brick was able to be saved and went back into a building that was built to be bushfire resilient, lockout embers, turned into a garage rather than a carport. And there's a lot of detailing in terms of ember exclusion. So that should survive. That's looking inside the building. They're the original mud bricks up to lintel height. And on the left-hand panel, that's where a car exploded and blew the roof off. But the wall survived and was just scabbled and had an earth render on it and some earth paint. So I do a fair bit of testing of earth materials as part of innovation research, I guess. And this one was to come up with using the local earth in Condobolin to do some work on a cultural centre there, an Aboriginal cultural centre. It was built by the community and repaired by the community. I had some problems with selection of soil and stabilisation of soil incorrectly. So that's the building there. It's just about repaired now, and it's 1,000 square metre building, quite a beautiful building, and it's a good one to save. And this is the current project at the moment in Avoca in the Highlands, the other side of Kangaroo Valley from me. And the old house in the background will be, part of it will be demolished back to the sound core, and that'll be linked into this new part of the building. But I tried some perlite under the slab there to, rather than do a waffle pod. I don't like the sustainability of polystyrene insulation, and yeah, it sort of has to go to the tip to get rid of it at the end of the building's life. Unfortunately, can't separate it from the concrete to recycle the concrete even. So a lot of innovations going on around the world. I mean, we've over 11,000 years with people who were self-building with all different climatic and resource sort of shortages. What's available locally. Some people had no timber, some people had timber. Freezing cold climates, very hot climates, all sorts of climates and conditions around the world, the resources that were available to people, including their own time. Has come up with a huge variety of beautiful vernacular design that has been developed across the world. I'll just go through that. But all these buildings are built by hand for people, so they're quite beautiful buildings. So this one here in India, these buildings are earthquake proof. They're round and made of cob, so they prove earthquake proof. This is a cottage in England, which is quite a common thing in the English countryside in some areas. Thick cob walls with straw thatched roofs. All of this materials were available right there on site, and that's about as sustainable as you can build it. And we need to learn from that. So here's some early rammed earth in France, in the countryside. There was a real revival in France in the mid to late 1700s, when Australia was sort of being discovered, to when it was settled. And some of these buildings are still in existence. I've visited them. I've been and stayed in one. Best night's sleep I had traveling. Just beautiful, simple buildings. This is what they do in Yemen. Some of these buildings are 11 to 10 to 11 stories high, made of almost a cob hybrid, cob brick method, which is innovative in itself. And the building, the top floor is 250 millimeters thick, and each subsequent each floor that they put into it had an extra 100 mil put into it to support the floor above. So they started off very wide at the bottom and ended up at 250 at the top. Very clever buildings, naturally ventilated. The windows got larger towards the top. There's less draw on the airflow, so you get smaller, and it gets smaller and lighter, larger windows and thinner, lighter weight mass walls as you go up. Very clever buildings. These are some Hakka people in China were sort of a minority that were in trouble a lot of time, had to build themselves sort of fortifications for the family. So they're these community homes dating back to the 12th century. I think they're rammed earth, and quite a beautiful solution to their problems. This is a castle in Maybod in Iran. It goes back right now. It's 2,000 to 4,000 years old, and there were innovations in that, including some drainage done with earth, and that's looking over the wall into the city there, where they're using, and they have used, earth for the floors, for the walls, and for the roofs.
Just let you know, got about 2 minutes to go, Pete.
2 minutes.
I know you've got a few slides there, so
yeah, okay. Yep. So this is an ice house. So they started doing these 700 years ago. They produced the ice outside in a shallow pools and then they store it in a pit below. There's a pit, exploring that, and there's the roof of the ice house above. This is mosque in Mali. They built the scaffolding into the walls, so they can do annual re-rendering of the community. In New Mexico, where they used things like cactus juice to protect the walls from erosion. Beautiful buildings in Africa, where they used earth in the floors, walls, roofs. Here's an apartment block in France. In Lyon, there's a whole area there where there's rammed earth revival, started with Francois Contereau in the mid 1700s, and there's an extraordinary amount of buildings there. I'll get going through this. There's a little building I did with earth floor walls. This one here, I've tried to make it as sustainable as possible. All the earth walls came straight out of the ground there, out of the footings. It's got rubble footings, recycled windows, earth floor, and try to make it as low embodied energy as possible. This building was built for a client who wanted to come down and use their holiday house any time of the year and be comfortable. So it was designed to trap the sun in the winter and keep the house warm, and be ventilated. The veranda ventilated in the summer to keep it cool, fully ventilated with louvers. It's inside. This is formed cob, which is something I'd like to work with. This is an experiment in Kangaroo Valley. That's the finished product there. That's all the local material straight out of the footings, rubble footings in that as well. Free draining footings. This is my house, which I've studied extensively. It's 113% full life cycle design, carbon zero, and it's 6 stars scorecard, 6 stars, 10 stars, 10 out of 10 scorecard, 6 out of 6 neighbours, less than $1,000 to run a year. Comfortable, safe, affordable, the rest of it. So this is our co-housing project in Lyon, France, recent one in the last 20, 30 years. Prefabricated rammed earth building in Lyon, brand new. All those columns were made in lumps and then lifted into place. This is a cob Bose project in Plymouth University, where they're experimenting with getting cob up to code. In France and England, there's a joint research project there. Prefabricated rammed earth panels, becoming big time in Europe. That's a big factory, Martin Roche's factory, where he does huge walls and then cuts them up, stores them during the colder months, and comes out and puts them together when the spring comes. This is a project that my son's doing up at Steiner School up in Central Coast, and multi-band. I don't particularly like the colours, but it's 10 metres tall and 400 mil thick and insulated. So it's got everything going for it. So can earth building meet today's challenges? Safe, healthy safe buildings, yes. Healthy lifestyle, yes. Comfortable, adaptive comfort, yes. Affordable to own and operate, yes. energy efficient. Well, we're working on that, but certainly they give you a comfortable adaptive comfort is good, and they're healthy and with natural ventilation, and they can get passive low energy, full zero life cycle design. They're very desirable. They can be beautiful, sustainable, and I've done some modelling using CSIRO analog towns, so we can work out what our buildings are like in the future. And we've just discovered that they're climate change resilient. Their performance actually improves in time. So passive low energy earth architecture is, I'm going to talk in a couple of weeks on passive low energy earth architecture. And I think it's the answer for anyone, anywhere, everyone and anyone, anywhere in the world can build with earth and achieve all those outcomes. And I think it's the way of the future. It was definitely the way of the past, but that's where I'm going to leave it. There's plenty of questions I can answer in questions. I think cover stuff. That do, Matt? Quick enough?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. I imagine, I know you could keep going for a long time, and every one of those buildings has its own hour-long story to tell. Right. But it's great to see the diversity of structures and the size that you can get to. Mm. Have you been to Yemen? That was the one that...
I haven't been to Yemen. It's a bit dodgy to go to Yemen at the moment. I've been to Iran just before the trouble started there, and witnessed some of the very clever courtyard buildings, designs there that extremely sophisticated, really, hundreds of years old, and solar buildings. They had a winter end and a summer end of the building, and reflective ponds in the middle, and wind catches, and all very clever stuff, and water supply coming in underneath that they used in cooling.
Yeah,
designs. Yeah.
I'll if anyone's got any particular questions for Pete, drop them in the chat. But I'll get you to stop sharing your screen.
Sure.
Now, Pete and Martin can get his up. And if there's no particular questions, we'll roll on to Martin and save that time for the end. If you want to share your screen, Martin, fantastic. Yeah, I think we'll jump into Martin's talk now, and yeah, do you have any more questions at the end? So just to introduce Martin, or Dr. Martin Trini, as I mentioned before, he runs Earthship Eco Homes as a consultancy, which is dedicated to housing solutions that reduce expense, minimize environmental impacts, but also maximize beauty and resilience to climate change. He's got some impressive qualifications, from a PhD with the University of Adelaide, a Bachelor of Industrial Design, Diploma of Building Design, Cert 4 in Building Construction, as well as a certificate in Permaculture Design. So very in-depth experience across all aspects of building design. And he brings this to work in his work on earthships. He's also the owner and builder and creator of Earthship Ironbark, which is the first council-approved earthship in Australia, and came together with about quite a lot of volunteers participating throughout the construction of that project. So over to you, Martin. Thanks for joining us. Take yourself off mute.
That's a great tip, Matt. Thank you for that. Thank you for the introduction. I'm here to explain what an earthship is. Essentially, it's another sort of special type, I suppose, of earth building. Yeah, I'm a designer, builder, educator, and researcher. As Matt said, my company is called Earthship Eco Homes. My mission is to bring earthships into Australia. I also work part-time at the University of South Australia, where I lecture on design. And I'll be talking about earthship design, construction, community building, earthship performance, and earthships in Australia. So the number one goal of earthships is self-sufficient ecological living, which is also anticipating some of the things that the 21st century has got coming for us. It does this with 6 design principles, the first of which is natural heating and cooling, natural and upcycled materials, off-grid power, water and sewage treatment, and food production. So this is anticipating threats like bushfires, storms, rising fuel prices, water restrictions, the next pandemic, and food security. All these things are addressed through the earthship design in one way or another. So I guess the 2 main innovations with the earthship design is this big mound of earth at the back of the building, the south side, also often the east and west side of the building, called the berm or the earth berm. And that's about 1,000 tons of earth, which essentially regulates temperature inside the building. The other thing is the greenhouse on the north side of the building. So yeah, the berm is, I like to think of it as the thermal battery, which is storing the energy captured from the sun in the greenhouse. And this berm is also a terrific defense against bushfires and storms, because you've got about 1,000 tons of earth between you and the bushfire or the intense wind. The greenhouse is this powerful solar engine that charges that thermal battery. And it also has many other wonderful functions, which I'll go into in a minute. This is some of my PhD research, which looks at the energy efficiency of different types of walls. And if you look at the top of the graph, what I found was that an earthship that is insulated and earth bermed comes in at about 8.5 stars. And then when you add a greenhouse, that's these green bars, that almost halves the energy consumption, because you're getting that wonderful free solar energy from the sun. So what I kind of concluded from this graph is that the earth berm and the greenhouse are these 2 kind of magical ingredients that which can lead to very low energy use for heating and cooling in the home. So that brings me on to principle number 1, use physics, not fuel. So the earthship, this is a cross section of the earthship, and noting that north is out to the right here with the greenhouse facing north, the earth berm or the thermal battery to the south. There are also these pipes called earth tubes that go through the earth berm. They bring fresh air into the building and condition the air to the stable temperature of the soil. So it's like free air conditioning. There's rigid polystyrene insulation to stop unwanted heat loss from the retaining wall that is typically made out of old car tires filled with earth. But you can also use other materials suitable for retaining walls, such as concrete blocks or rammed earth, really whatever retaining wall system you like. But of course, you want to make an ecological choice there. It's got a highly insulated roof, an openable window from the bedroom or living space into the greenhouse, and then an openable skylight. And what that does is it allows hot air from the greenhouse to exit. Hot air rises, of course, and that brings in this cool air from the earth tubes. And so I want to also talk about this idea of buffer zones. The berm and the greenhouse are buffer zones that isolate the building from air temperature. So why would you want to put air around a house? Wouldn't it be better to put the stable temperature of the soil, which sits at about 15 to 20 degrees? You've got your highly insulated roof, and then the greenhouse is also a buffer zone, buffering the living spaces from what's going on outside the building. So you're kind of fooling the living spaces into thinking that, you know, it's only 32 outside rather than 42. in my Earthship, I'm getting 22-degree air coming through the earth tubes when it's 42 degrees outside, and this is with no fans, no power. So yeah, this all leads to remarkably stable indoor air temperatures. So here's a photo I took in Taos, New Mexico in the USA in an Earthship greenhouse. It's essentially a super functional corridor. You catch and store solar energy there. It drives cross ventilation through the earth tubes as the hot air exits the skylights. It's the buffer zone from extreme outdoor temperature. It also treats wastewater and irrigates food and flowers. That's what you see, that garden on the left there. You can even flush your toilet with the grey water that exits the end of this garden bed. The plants are producing oxygen and they're sequestering the carbon dioxide that you exhale. And it forces the occupants to make good choices about shampoo and other chemicals that they're pouring down their drains, because guess what? It ends up in your garden. Ultimately, you get to enjoy the mental health benefits of an indoor garden. And there's a whole new science emerging called biophilia, which proves these benefits. So here's some earth tubes under construction through the tire wall. You can also see the polystyrene rigid insulation. So this is the free air conditioning that's going on constantly 24/7, 365 days of the year, no fans, no moving parts. You get lots of air changes through the building, which means healthy indoor air. Here's the earth berm under construction. The thermal battery that's safely storing heat energy. It's regulating and stabilizing indoor air temperature. It's that buffer zone that's protecting you from extreme outdoor temperature and protecting you from bushfires and storms. So principle number 2, natural and upcycled materials. Well, this is why we build with tires. We humans have created a massive problem on the planet with car tires. Now, you can recycle them in various ways. This is what we produce in Australia, 56 million car tires, and that's enough to make 56,000 Earthships per year. That's a third of all houses in Australia could be made this way. So yes, you can recycle tires, but here we're actually upcycling and reusing them. So zero energy is really needed to transform these things into bricks. We just fill them with earth, essentially. So we just start by putting them on a compacted base. There's no concrete footing, which is another ecological advantage over other walls, which typically need big concrete footings. We put a bit of shade cloth in there to hold the material in there. You can see we've got gravel for the first layer, which stops moisture from wicking up into the wall. But an interesting thing about this is it's fun and people want to come and learn and get involved. We're just using simple tools like sledgehammers to compact the earth, levels, shovels. You know, it's all stuff you can buy for $100 at the hardware store and get going. Here you can see a cob mixture being applied to the tire wall in preparation for rendering. And it feels really good. And it is good to redefine waste in this way. You meet new people, make new friends. So we build the community and a new economy. These guys up here are paying us guys to actually teach them about sustainable construction methods. And it actually changes the paradigm of sort of how the money flows through a construction project. Here's a finished tire wall. This is my tire wall. I'm sitting in this building now. We put earth renders over the tires so you don't see the tires, or you can do lime renders, and we do cement renders on the exterior part of the building to protect from rain, wind, sun, and bushfire. Here's a little video of the team at Earthship Inman Valley. This is 2020. About 30 people built that wall in 4 weeks. We also upcycle bottles and jars for the sheer beauty. They're also an economical brick, and you know, it's a waste material. But also in my Earthship designs, I'm experimenting with straw bale, rammed earth, cob, hempcrete. All these materials have their place in earthships as well. So I don't want you going away thinking that you must use tires, but the tires do have their advantages. This again is my PhD research, the tire wall. This one with no earth berm. This one has the earth berm, is comparable to a mud brick wall. Mud brick walls being renowned for being very ecological. Yeah, I've crunched the numbers on the eco efficiency of the construction materials of these walls. So tire wall testing at UniSA, we've tried to measure the strength of these walls and figure out how they perform in an earthquake. These tires are possibly the most durable, resilient, strongest thing we humans have ever invented. So it does make sense to use them as a construction material. And if I just play this video, you'll see the hydraulic ram. We're measuring the force of the ram, flexing the wall. And what we found out is that these walls are like no other wall. They kind of bounce back into shape. They would be amazing in earthquakes, and they are certainly strong enough to be load-bearing, roof-bearing walls in homes. So principle 3, renewable energy, panels, solar hot water, batteries, inverters, all that stuff. We know how to do that. The advantage of earthships is that they don't need a lot of these things. You can have a small battery system and small solar panels because the homes are so energy efficient for heating and cooling. And so again, my PhD research showed that it's more ecological to have batteries and panels and inverters than it is for in this case, it was the South Australian energy grid that I modeled. All right, principle number 4, renewable water. Okay, this is my earthship again, gravel roof, filters the water, it flows into a big tank, which was, you guessed it, made out of tires. Then there's a box with an electric pump, a pressure tank, filters. This pressurizes the water to the house and also pressurizes fire sprinklers. And again, this you can see a dramatic difference in how ecological it is, water tanks and pumps compared to the water grid, which uses vast amounts of electricity, concrete, pipes, chemicals for treatment. So yeah, go off grid is my message. Principle 5, water is precious. So you got to reduce, reuse, and upcycle. The earthship does this beautifully with this indoor garden. So at the end of the garden, there's this grey water diversion valve. Usually you're going to have it flicked to go into the garden. Sometimes, say you do a load of pooey nappies or something in the washing machine, you might want to send it to the septic tank. But 99.9% of the time, it flows in through this wicking bed garden with gravel at the bottom. The water is then wicked up into the plants and you can grow food. Again, much more ecological than sewage treatment plants. Principle 6, the last principle, we're aiming for 0 food mile food, organic food, grown with wastewater. This is the holy grail of food. It's at your doorstep. You don't need to get in the car to drive to get it. It's literally within your home. So this is me with my first bunch of bananas in my earthship and one of my clients at the Narara Eco Village with some of her garden. Again, my earthship there. So I want to share some results of thermal monitoring. If you can't measure it, you can't control it. So this is an earthship in Western Australia. It's full of temperature sensors. And what you'll find on a summer week, each one of these peaks is a day. On this 5th day here, it hit about 40 degrees outside. In the greenhouse, it was about 32 degrees, but inside the building, it's sitting on about 23 degrees. Now in winter, when it's dropping to almost 0 degrees, again, it's sitting on about 18.5 degrees inside the building. And you can see in the greenhouse, it can be 25 degrees, even though it's only 15 inside.
Just let you know, you got about 1.5 minutes.
Thanks, Matt. I'll speed through this then. So I'm going to skip the summary and just show you a few of the earthships that are happening in Australia. This was the first one built in Queensland. This is my Earthship, first council approved in Australia, Tassie, Jurien Bay, Western Australia. This guy invented a tire pounding machine. This one's in Victoria. This one is in New South Wales. That one they use rammers like you would use for rammed earth walls to pound the tires. This is the one I just showed you in New South Wales. The one I just showed you the performance graphs for in Western Australia, built by 50 volunteers in 4 weeks. One in Inman Valley, built in 18 months by the owner builders. Another photo of it there. Another one in Goolwa. This is a suburban Earthship design, so you don't have to go off grid. And this one's made out of rammed earth, and it's in Tasmania, and they're actually going to build 5 of them on a strata title. Another rammed Earthship, no tires in this one. And my latest project, Earth B&B in Wollonga, got workshops starting on the 3rd of February. This is going to be super bushfire resilient. We're going to build it in 4 weeks. There's the floor plan, and there's where you sign up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martin. That's really interesting. Some great photos, and it looks pretty enticing, I have to say.
Thanks,
And
Matt. Thanks for the extra 3 minutes. That was handy.
Well, it was it's really interesting, and it gave a good lead into the rammed earth section that Ray will talk about. And because we are slightly over, there was a couple of questions there, but I might move straight on to Ray and then leave time for questions at the end. That's all
Thanks,
right.
Matt.
So do you want to get your slides up, Ray?
Yeah.
Or photos?
Yep. Well, cheers.
And while you're doing that, just to introduce Ray, who is an architect by training and has been involved in earth building for over 45 years. Sorry, what was that, Ray?
Oh, sorry, is my screen sharing there now? Oh, good, yeah, I think it is, yeah.
Not yet, but no, still hasn't come up yet. So Ray's been involved in, it's coming up now.
Yep.
Earth building for over 45 years, an active member of the Earth Building Association of Australia, and I imagine worked in a multitude of projects over that time. His most recent was the new secret garden at Western Sydney University, which is a permaculture design linked in with rammed earth buildings, and I think he'll touch on that as well. Just noting there's a couple of comments coming in the chat that are worth mentioning. A few people saying they're so glad to see earth building being discussed in this week, and Martin, you're a dead set legend, shifting the paradigm from Nest Narumi. So that's very nice to hear. So over to you, Ray, and yeah, thank you so much for giving your time today.
Great. Okay, I'm probably zeroing in on some particulars here. We've just been doing a lot of work recently with rammed earth without the cement, as Martin was showing some of the embodied energy figures of rammed earth, but typically that would be cement, which bumps up the actual embodied energy. So what I'd like to show particularly is, I'll show you some pictures of rammed earth with cement, but I want to show what we're recently doing, where we're using on-site material, found materials, showing the color and diversity and getting that with just some simple detailing, so you can actually do rammed earth without cement. This first one is just a wall we stripped just quite recently. It was a little shed on this property, and the material was just sourced from we're actually building a fairly large car park, and just for some stormwater pits, we got this material, and we knew it was good because it was producing a good road building material, and also we saw some nice color. Some of the red colors. It's just the end wall. The shutters come off with the chamfers sort of formed in, and you see the red. Can you see my cursor at all? Is that?
Yep.
Yeah, great. So you see the red patches we put in, some lovely red colours that went in. Most of the colouring was like this. The top part of the wall's dried a little bit. This here, the formwork's just been stripped off. This is the sort of colour you get from the stripped formwork. But with the without cement, the rammed earth, some of the typical details here at the bottom, you'd have a little bit of lime mixed with a mix, and above that would be a damp course. And then at regular intervals, say 600, sometimes on the ends every 300s, you do a little bit of lime just in the outside layer. And that's what's called an erosion control layer. So if the water and when the wall does erode a little bit, the rain only gets a certain speed up, and then it's shed by this harder erosion control layer. So that's one of the details we put into the walls to save that use of cement all the way through the wall. So you can see with this, a lot of pretty colours that you get from using on-site soils, and of course very low embodied energy, because it really was only got from a few metres away just across here with this particular wall. So I'll just flick through that. This is typically the sort of gear that would be involved in rammed earthworks for a large house. You've got all the forms. That's the bucket for a bobcat. We're mixing. There's some round forms for columns, which you can do in round earth. There's a compressor. Here's actually a cement stabilised rammed earth project. It was done for Tiggy Forest over in Western Australia. Luigi Roselli was the designer for this one. They call it the Great Wall of Western Australia. So it shows some of the things that can be done with rammed earth. And overseas, just hand ramming systems and the formwork's quite heavily braced, because you do get a lot of sideways movement with your ramming, so it's nice to keep the walls straighter. That's the backside of the truck. This is the bobcat that we now own. We brought some equipment from Western Australia to our rammed earth work. So Steve Dobson is the pioneered a lot of the earlier, the later rammed earth work, as Peter mentioned. This is his second. A lot of equipment. He sent some over, and that's what we're going to do a fair bit of rammed earth work. There's an internal picture of a well-finished place down the south coast. There's another well-finished. These are cement-based finishes, but this picture is of a church in Berlin, one of the earlier buildings done by Martin Rauch. These walls were done without cement; they're just straight clay. And Martin's actually developed, through testing and a lot of work, some of the details that we're now using with our rammed earth work, which means you can exclude the cement content. Martin's saying to us, well, we don't know we know the history of rammed earth, but we don't know the history of cement with rammed earth. We don't know how long it will actually last even, whereas he's using sort of much older sort of techniques. This is the sort of typical mix material you'd use in rammed earth, so fairly gravelly sort of mix, a little bit of clay and sand and salt. This is a wall in the south of France showing a traditional rammed earth work. So again, you've got these lime layers. These buildings would, as Peter was saying, late 1700s, early 1800s. That lime layer would act as a little erosion control layer. But you see quite a tall wall just in a village near Lyon, and a lot of the area there there's quite a few rammed earth buildings, and of course we're looking at buildings hundreds of years old now. This shows some of the finishes in a church building that get done with rammed earth. So it can be quite a high level of finish. It doesn't need to be necessarily so rough. It can be quite refined if you need it to be. Here's a picture of some work in was it Sri Lanka? I think it was. This guy here is George Middleton. He wrote some of our best work in the country on earth building in the early 50s. He was employed by the government at the experimental building stations. And I was just reading some of his work this morning, still very thorough and still quite appropriate. And his work on rammed earth was pre-cement adding. So none of this rammed earth had cement in it. It was all done without cement. And he was showing some of he was the United Nations representative on low-cost housing in the 50s. And so he mainly travelled, I think it was Sri Lanka, I don't think it was India, I think it was Sri Lanka, where he was showing how to do rammed earth building. And so as a resource, some of his work is still quite relevant. bulletin 5. They're hard to get now, but still very thorough. You can get them actually as scanned documents, and they're actually probably a little bit more portable now than they were. So George Milton. Here's a wall we've just done recently on a shed. Why I put this one in, it's an interesting shot. This is just, the soil for this was just found there. We excavated this site and you couldn't get much closer. It's a rocky sort of sandy material, and that's the earth form. So a very pretty wall, just done very locally. So embodied energy is so low because you're really only just using that material and putting in the wall. You can see a little bit, I think the lime layer, you don't see a lot of it. Sometimes be quite a fine layer. I think the top one got missed out, but there's a bit of lime layer in the bottom of that wall. Here's another one of our recent projects. We did a house over at Cranebrook, and again, this material used in this, you can see the lime layers again. This material is a recycled sandstone. It came from a 12-metre hole at North Sydney. Would have been better to have used it in a building right near North Sydney, but still, it had to be moved off site. And it's better if you intercept waste or use on-site waste, but if you're intercepting waste, often it could be already excavated, so you're not paying for excavation costs. On this particular project, we used local clay from the house. We wet that up and mixed it with this crushed sandstone, and that was what we used to do this project. Hang on, I'm just going backwards here. It's another project we did at Hartley. It's a fairly tall wall, and it used again on-site material. This red flash came from local clays, and we used local gravels from the site. And there was a quarry a couple of kilometres away where we used another fraction we didn't quite have in the mix on site, and that enabled us to get quite a good material. Again, no cement in this whole walls, so it's all done with just rammed clay, rammed earth. There's another part of the wall. I'll show you can see the erosion control layers again. And this red flash was just something that came from the site. You can see the formwork lines in the wall. And that you can when you take the formwork off, remove those if you want, or you can leave them in. And up from there, people like that patterning through the wall, showing how the wall was built. This formwork, which came developed by Steve Dobson in Western Australia, is a steel-backed plywood form. So it makes it quite light but quite strong, and that's what you need for rammed earth. A quite resistant wall, so you can ram more smoothly. And even then, with the sun along the face of that, you can see that it's still slightly in and out parts of the wall. So it's very hard to get a wall absolutely dead flat, but then that's part of the character of the wall. And sometimes we like to have sometimes a certain openness to the structure of it, so they call that boniness. They see some of the gravels and use those textures a little bit more. There's the part of the wall, timber lintels or walls. In Western Australia, with Pete there, it was seeing some of Steve's work and some others' work. This shows typical materials that would be mixed up together. This particular project did have cement, but it's still very similar. There we go, wrong way. Pushing up rather than down. This is the inside of that church in Berlin again. Again, that's just straight rammed soil. It came from a church that was demolished on the site. This is where the Berlin Wall was, and it was just to sort of give that connection to the history of that. The earth, it's an earth floor too, in that. It's showing some work in China, just a lot of people ramming ramps to get the soil up. And there's the typical Chinese rammers, a wide head rammer with a narrow head rammer. We've made them and they work quite well. Actually, the little narrow head rammer, you get quite strong ramming. And in China, they're almost ramming walls as quickly as what we can with our equipment, with their teams, just choosing the right time of the year and the right moisture content and sourcing material locally. And even though they're using hand ramming, still able to make similar amounts of wall in a day. It's just showing rammed earth walls before the roof goes on, showing those round columns that could be done in earth. in rammed earth. This is again a cement project, one of Steve's projects. This is another outside the house at Cranebrook again. We put some stone in the bottom. There's lovely ironstone rock on site. We set those in the side of the frame, formwork, and you have to be fairly careful just setting them in because you don't want some softer under ram material behind. It's the front entrance. This place again, the rammed earth walls. There's some sandstone painting. And we milled material on site. You see the ironbark post there, and we left the Wayne sort of edge. There's quite a sculptural filling to the posts, and as well as using on-site material. This is the Kakadu Visitor Centre, which is an original Glenberg design, working with Troppo architects, and Steve Dobson was the did the rammed earth walls on these. And again, you see these lovely rammed earth columns. This is inside that house at Cranebrook, looking into a little like a canyon we've had where the water from the pool filters through, and ferns, and you sit on this seat, and the air comes through in summer. That airflow through a bit like Martin's earthships, that sort of concept, they're coming through from a little waterfall area, and just showing that what you can do with the reveals at the real and the sculptural shapes you can get into rammed earth. Showing some of the formwork, again with that steel backing. This formwork has a wider top than what we've got at the moment. But the beauty of that is the through bolts a bit lower, and so your last render can be on top of that. So the bolts, so when you take the formwork off, you don't take the bolts out. They're slightly bent, but it doesn't break away the top of the wall. So it's just a little bit heavier, but it's just a better way to use your formwork. There's brackets that fit to that formwork, so you can put planks on, and there's your end panels, which will have a chamfer built on the side, and that's clamped into the forms. You have bolts behind, and from those bolts there's wedging put behind the end forms. That shows the rammer that's used, it's a little pneumatic rammer, about 14 kilo rammer. This is part of one of Martin Rauch's latest work with his prefabricated panels. These ones have been put in place with the roof already on, but they're put in place by a forklift. A couple of ton panel, they're all strapped together, and they're placed on wedges and mortared in like a great big brick. And then later on, they have a system of, this lady here, it's Martin's sister, who's quite good at, she leads up the team, something like 20 or 30 people just doing the actual repair of the panels. And these panels are made, this is in Austria, and typically during the winter. And then when the summer comes and the building period, they can get on site and fairly quickly put up quite a lot of rammed earth without all the ramming on site. So it's just really this finishing and installing. Sometimes these are put in place by cranes, but obviously you can see how on a slab a forklift can lift up a panel and put it in place. Just shows
about a 1 minute.
1 minute. I'm not really there. I guess this shows a precast panel again with insulation earth that Martin's working with. There's a project in Darmstadt in Germany. It shows the consistency of your rammed earth material. So it's slightly wettish, but not too wet. There's tests, like hand tests for that. This is a rammed earth dome in a pantry that Steve had done. This lovely rammed earth wall of Martin's, showing all the colours and things that you can go into rammed earth walls. This is a little house we've done at the Hawkesbury campus at Western Sydney, and there's a place called Secret Garden there. I was talking to Matt earlier, if people want to see some rammed earth work. This is a display, 30 square metre garden house, and we have a rammed earth wall in the front and below the windows. This is a church in Margaret River that Steve did, one of his earlier projects that really got rammed earth going in the Margaret River area. Some lovely rammed earth walls in the back and rammed earth floor. This is again another picture that building the form just stripped off it. And Martin Rauch's hospital project, again seeing all the textures and colours and things you can do with rammed earth. Well, that's it, I think. there's a couple of little other ones. I'll get out of this. Yep, I'll just quickly show some of the other ones. It just shows some of the texture in rammed earthworks. It's showing how you allow some erosion, but you get a lot of rock in material. It's just a plan of a little garden house with a large form, which is the standard form we have. And this shows just cross sections of the controlled erosion. So after a few years, you're allowing these control elements to stick out and actually allowing erosion. But after about 2 years, it doesn't seem to erode much more. So that's it. Thanks, mate. No,
Wonderful.
Stop share. Yep.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Yeah, they're just such beautiful buildings. It's really the precast panels is something I hadn't heard of before, and quite interesting to see that that's somewhere that rammed earth is going as well. So
yeah, it's probably one of the.
Sorry.
I just say it's one of the bigger innovations in rammed earth, and also not using cement. We seem to have all gone that way, and we're up to 8-10% cement now. But Martin's showing you do some very pretty buildings without cement. And again, it's just a little bit of detailing, and that's what I think the innovation is, really just understand that a little bit of detailing, have that confidence to give it a go.
Yeah. Look, we've had plenty of questions roll in. Firstly, just thank you to all three of you for your time and really amazing photos and like a great overview of kind of what's possible, I think, with different types of earth building. So there are a couple of questions that came through around a similar theme around loving the look of these buildings and wanting to live in something like that, but how does this work in a more urban and suburban setting? Like, are there good examples of earthships, mud brick and rammed earth that work on a suburban site? And I think maybe that's Michelle and Ness both asked this, and something I want to add to that, I guess, is can you use how much soil do you need for a typical house, and can that come from a suburban site, or does it need a bigger footprint?
I think Matt, there's a rule of thumb that the footprint of the building 600 deep. If you took 600 deep from the footprint of the building, that would build everything in a building. It gives you a bit of a rough idea, I guess. But I think in the I'm generally working in rural and suburban, like rural, regional suburban areas, and on a rural property, it's easy to win the material from the site. If you get into a suburban, I mean, blocks are getting smaller and smaller these days, so that's a bit of an issue, I guess. But you can get a fair bit out of the footings. That little building, there was a little cob building I showed you that we got all the material for that building, for the floor and the walls, out of the footings of the building itself. So the footings were larger than a normal footing because they were a rubble drain footing. So they were 500 wide and 700 deep minimum. So you win quite a bit of material out of that, and it's generally clay. And then you have to break that back with sand or something like that. So we ended up doing half sand and half clay. So we brought in sand. Half the material is actually sand brought in. But yeah.
Any thoughts, Ray or Martin, you want to add?
Oh, maybe. Yeah, we're doing a project at the moment in Currajong, and it's a compliant development, a 60 square metre house on the back of another house. And when we started excavating the site, there were retaining walls there, and whenever we took those out, a lot of topsoil on top, that came off. But what was underneath at the back cut was actually a really good rammed earth material, but we were looking for it. But if we wanted, it could have got mixed in with all the site soil. So I think sometimes we assume we can't get something, but sometimes it's a surprise. You might have to put a septic tank in, and really that tank will give us most of the material we need for that house. There's also a holding tank that's got to go in, so we'll supplement it with that. We may need to add a little bit of sand or crushed sandstone, which we can get pretty affordably, and that'll make the mix. So what I've found in time is don't assume you can't get on-site soil, because sometimes some of the best soil we've later found was actually on site, and we've got stuff in. So I think there are, but then having said that, you can get a lot of intercepted waste material from a pool builder down the road, or an excavator, or from town. They're often moving material around. So sometimes it may mean having another little yard where you can put the material, mix it, and then bring it to site, get the right moisture content. So there's a few ways of working the equation rather than just getting it from a yard that is an option, obviously. And they do use that quite a lot in Western Australia because I know they get consistent material and people like that. But I think really with round earth, the tolerances, you can really build quite tall buildings really in terms of compression. So they can take a lot of load. So if the building's not optimal, it often doesn't matter as long as it's pretty reasonable. There's some, as people said earlier, as long as you've got some sort of aggregates within the mix and some clay, you can usually get a pretty good result as long as the moisture content is optimized with round earth. One of the critical things is getting that moisture right, and that means you can round a lot better, and it also means when it's round better, it's stronger and also more weather resistant. And that's one of the advantages.
I think in a rural situation, you can win the material on site. In a city, even Sydney, it's the intercepted waste is the key to getting material there. The amount of tunneling material coming out of Sydney is just extraordinary. We had a guy come to a conference a couple of years ago. He was talking about the number of million tons of material being tunneled out for the light rail and road and rail tunnels, and that's a problem that needs to be gotten rid of. But it's a resource as well. And in Paris, they're doing some tunneling in the middle of Paris, and all that material is going into co-housing project in Paris. So that's a good use of it,
Yeah. Sorry, Martin.
Yeah, Matt, I was going to respond to the question about earthships in the suburbs. I did give two examples. There's one at the Narara Eco Village, and there's the one down at Goa in South Australia. And so instead of bringing the earth berm around the east and west ends of the building like a typical earthship, I've just put the earth berm to the back on the south side with the greenhouse on the north side. And then at the east and west ends, there are straw bale walls, which of course are amazing insulative walls. And I'm already finding that those two buildings are performing really well. And they fit on a 30 by 30, or actually the one in Narara, I think is 30 by 20 meter block. Now that's still a fairly large block. I mean, as Peter said, that's another issue, the size of blocks of land. But, if you've got a reasonable sized block of land and you've got that solar orientation, you can face the building north, then everything that's been discussed today is possible.
Yeah. And that 600 mil rule of thumb is interesting as a kind of to understand the scope for what you can do with quite a small level of excavation and diverting fill from other urban constructions. I noticed somebody mentioned they were living in Christie Walk in Adelaide, and is that an earth build or a straw bale? All right. There's lots of questions here, so I'll keep rolling on. Martin, Michelle, and this is a question I had as well about use of tyres in earthships. Do they leach anything into the soil over the longer term? Is there sort of issues around toxicity there?
No, because in an earthship, the tyres are all safely away from moisture, sun, air, fire. We take great care to do the waterproofing and drainage, and they all get rendered over. So essentially I feel like it's actually the safest place to put a tire. And if you're concerned about things leaching out of tires, then you should stop driving cars, because every time you drive a car, you're putting microplastics into the environment, and there is tire dust in our lungs. So, let's let's keep this real, you know, like we've got a problem with tires. They're part of our transportation system. They do cause problems, but I'm confident that sort of safely putting them in houses, it's not going to lead to some, you know, like let's think of some really disastrous building materials like asbestos. I'm just not seeing that coming with tires. It's not going to happen. And you know, if we really think tires are so toxic, let's fix that at the source. And you know, because there are toxic things in tires. You know, if you sprinkle acid on them, then you know they'll degrade and nasty stuff will come out. And so yeah, sure, that's I guess you know, with all these construction methods, there are pros and cons.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely you know, let's think like acid rain maybe, you know, but hopefully the render on the tires stops acid rain from hitting the tires, you know.
And this was another question about the tires. There's some kind of waterproofing that goes around that tire retaining wall. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So some of the photos I showed, the polystyrene in the earth berm, that's where we put the waterproofing. So the waterproofing is actually about 1 meter away from the tire wall. So just say there was some sort of small hole in the waterproofing, the water would still have to travel through 1 meter of earth and polystyrene before it reached the tire wall. The tire wall is about 700 mil thick. So we've just never had a problem with that. And it's sort of like tried and tested retaining wall waterproofing and drainage methods. So we're not really inventing anything new there.
Fantastic. And for everybody, I guess, question about getting approval for earth builds by council. Is there anything particular you need to know? Any issues that come up when talking with councils, and any guidance that's useful for people looking into it?
Building anything these days is difficult. If you want to build a brick veneer house, it's bloody difficult, I can tell you. There's too many rules and regulations, and I don't know why, but it's a lot harder now than it was 40 years ago, I can tell you that much. And I think the conditions that they put on you are easy to cut and paste out of old submissions other people have used. And I think it's when building inspectors used to have to type everything out with 2 fingers, and there were less conditions on development applications. But everything's difficult. Everything needs to be complied with. Energy efficiency is an issue with earth buildings in colder climates, but we've got a new development in that space where we've applied to have some lower density earth materials accepted into the NATHERS library. That process is underway at the moment. So there'll be choices that people can make to optimize their wall characteristics for whatever climate they're living in. And that's something we've learned from vernacular design. Like in the very cold climates, people were using daubing mixtures, which were sort of like clay and straw and dung, and they were much lighter than mud brick or rammed earth, which were traditionally used in the arid, hot areas of the world where they work a lot better for controlling comfort. And cob is sort of a medium range thing, and it was used in England and parts of France where it was give you a quite comfortable building. So there's all these things we've learned from vernacular building that we're starting to incorporate into earth buildings now. And so that the energy efficiency side of things, you should design your building so that it's climate responsive. And if you do, then and if you use the right density mix and the right thickness mix, you'll get it through the NATHERS situation. We're also working with NATHERS to get they're working on it, a more appropriate assessment pathway for passive low energy buildings rather than conditioned buildings. So ones that are naturally conditioned, as Martin was talking about. You've got a thermal battery with the massive building, and it's how you ventilate it you ventilate it at night in summer to get the cool of the night into the building for the daytime, and you can close down. So it's how you ventilate the building is how you can get a building that doesn't need heating and cooling. It's comfortable through design and through operation. So there's that side of it, and then the other side of it, you just got to prove that it's structurally sound. Most rammed earth buildings that are engineered. There are sometimes you get a building certifier who's a bit unaware of earth building, and they might need some convincing. Ray sometimes uses the earth EBAR book and hands that to the certifier and says, here, this is a book that shows you how it's done, and they'll accept that. The Earth Building Association is always here to help people with advice, and so that we're always ready to help people. We do it all the time. Yeah.
And I did put into the chat links to the EBAR, the Earth Building Association of Australia conference, which is coming up in February, and it's on their webpage, so you can see the webpage there. There's a earth floor workshop at Narara Eco Village this weekend, which I think maybe at Candy's Earthship. I saw online.
No, Candy's Earthship's all finished. I think it's Candy's neighbour who's building a most wondrous structure out of earth.
There you go. So there's a few things to follow up on, as well as the secret garden that Ray mentioned. I popped that in the chat. So maybe time for one more question. And Jasmine addressed this to Marty particularly, but I think I might ask all three of you some form of this. And Jasmine said, what would you say are the main barriers to someone who wants to build an earth ship from doing so? And if I can extend that to say, what are the barriers to get to the Smithsonian's prediction of earth being the main building material in 50 years' time? But I'll throw it to you first to start, Martin.
Well, I think one of the main barriers is just being too frightened to give it a go with an earthship, because what I still find is people say, oh, I didn't think you could get them council approved. And that was my whole agenda with my project, which was the first council approved earthship, is I wanted to show people that you could get it council approved. Now, it's helpful to understand that in Australia, we have a national construction code, which means that right across Australia, we're all singing from the same song sheet, with just a few very minor little state variations where you got to do the waterproofing in your bathroom a little bit different or something like that. There are a few little differences with some of the bushfire, rules from state to state, but more or less it's a national code. So if I can get an earthship approved, someone else can also get an earthship approved somewhere else in Australia. So I'd just say, be brave and just don't believe the myths about not being able to get approval for an earthship.
Pete and Ray, if you've got a short and snappy answer.
Yeah, put a bit in there. Thanks for that, Martin. I think a lot of people come to workshops and they don't go that next step of giving it a go. And I think, as much as saying, just do something small, a garden wall, for instance, or a shed, or something that isn't precious. I think, because when it's too precious, it's too hard. And I think probably the most accessible is things like cob and mud brick, where you just basically mixing these elements together and make something small. I mean, ramblers, not too hard if you use hand ramblers. Again, you can form up. There's details for timber forms and as long as the little details are sorted out, like a capping or whatever, or the lime layer. Once you understand that, give it a go somewhere, and then once you do that, I think there's a connection that you have with the material, and you start to see the finish and say, wow, that looks great, or this could be fixed up, or you talk with people, especially EBAR conferences and things like that. It's great to talk with people, saying, because we will make mistakes. There's lots of mistakes get made, but then sharing knowledge and being part of a whole community of people doing things, I think, is sometimes helpful. So you can share information, and then with online communication now, you can put up what you're doing, and there's lots of people doing that, and so you can find out lots of ways of doing things. So, but I think in terms of less cost, less energy, It's just a great way to build, and sometimes just means starting somewhere to get you going on something. And then once you start with something, you think, I could do this, or I could do this, and then you go to the next stage, whether it be, designing a whole earthship. I mean, that's all part of it. There's a lot of great ideas there, and they can all be incorporated into what you're doing. I think all these things, if you can talk with someone who's got some idea about design and the overall picture, they can also help once you do the larger projects. But it's just good to start with something. Even a greenhouse with an earth wall in the back of it, it can work. So yeah, so just start. Yeah, go Pete.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, I think when I started out, I already had 4 years building experience, and I knew nothing of earth building. And I grabbed some clay out of a hole in the backyard that was a dam, and it was the wrong material, and I went almost gave up on the idea. So I went and did a workshop and learned heaps and met a bunch of people who were all building in the Shoalhaven. And 2 of those folk were your parents, Matt. And we created a network of friends who were a bit of a support network and advice, where you get cheap this, where you get secondhand that, how do you do this, or just the heavy, hard, difficult jobs everyone would turn up, like bagging walls or something like that no one wanted to do on their own. And so we've made lifelong friends building with people. And so I think community, places like Namara, eco villages, or even local regions where people get to know each other and help each other. And I think that works brilliantly. I think you've got a bit of an area. It's generally an area like the Blue Mountains or the Shoalhaven or the Eltham, places around the country where people have got a bit of a work-life balance, and they're interested in building their own home and a healthier home and putting their hands into it, and sort of it can go commercial, and it will go commercial, I think. And I think as we start to look at embodied energy, as we start to get serious about making some action on climate change, I think earth building will present itself as one of the best solutions to look at. I really believe that.
Yeah,
I'm not just saying
so.
that.
No, look, I think that's a good spot to finish up on. But low embodied energy life cycle benefits.
Yeah.
Start small and talk to people who've got some experience are good ways to start getting into it. And I'm sure Ray, Pete and Martin will be happy to hear from anybody, and if they've got questions, and point them in the right direction if they're not the right people to speak to. So just want to say once again, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really interesting and lots of positive messages in the chat. Just a reminder as we wrap up that there's still a few more sessions to go for NENA and Co-Housing Australia's Housing Week. So tonight there's a session on sustainable housing with a couple of three great speakers from Architect and Renew, the advocacy group, speaking tonight. And then tomorrow lunchtime, we have a Housing as a Crucible for Change and NENA roundtable to talk about where to from here. So jump into those if you're interested. Check out the recordings of other sessions if you've missed them, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for the invitation, Matt.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Sorry if we didn't get to your question. There's too many, which is always a good sign.
Thank you, everybody.
Do we leave?
It depends how quickly you have to go somewhere.
I said you do.
I said it depends how quickly you have to go somewhere.
Hey, Ray, I got a question for you if you've got time.
Yeah.
So the engineers that you work with are okay with the no cement in the rammed earth, clearly?
Well, Martin, if you look at the MPA rating you're getting out of them, that typically would be about 2 megapascal out of a non-cement rammed earth. I mean, if it was only one, it'd be pretty poor.